We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back with prolific author and columnist Cal Thomas, continuing our discussion on the character of the election. Linguistic twistings have become part of our common parlance. And back to a point you made earlier, Cal, when we began this, talking about how obviously America's a constitutional republic, but the term democracy is on the line. Now, I have mentioned this with a former host of this show, a longtime host of this here radio show, Tim Donner. And I have a theory on why they use the term democracy. And I'd like to run it past you. If you use constitutional republic, people understand that there are certain, that, you know, this is something very specific to America. But if you use the term democracy, you're hearkening back 2,500 years to Athens, to Greek democracy. Essentially what you're saying is democracy is on the line. What you're saying here, or what you're trying to get across, is the idea that it's the whole of civilized Western history that is on the line. And that just makes America just a blip. So we can forget about America. We got to protect Western civilization, 2,500 years of it. And that's a lot more powerful than a constitutional republic, because a lot of people don't even like the Constitution.
Well, you have to define your terms once again. I mean, there are a lot of words that are being thrown around. People have their own definition, but that may not necessarily be the real definition. You have Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and a lot of the other left-wing Democrats who believe in a kind of democracy where there is no more electoral college, where New York and California, the two biggest states in America, get to decide who is president. And what is the majority in New York and California? Democrats. So they want a pure democracy because they believe that they can swing enough votes to their party to have a Democrat president and Congress in perpetuity. So when you hear them use the words democracy, what they really mean is get rid of the electoral college, the equality of all 50 states, and allow the big states, meaning Democrats, to vote for president and the Senate and the House and never have a Republican win another election.
How many Democrats would get whiplash if Florida and Texas became the largest states?
Well, it's funny, you know, they thought they had Virginia in their pocket, and then Virginia elected Glenn Youngkin, who's been a terrific governor and a Republican. You had Trump going to the Bronx, of all places, in New York recently, and making a pitch for Black and Latino votes. This is really worrying Democrats. It's worrying them so much that they're on programs like MSNBC and CNN saying, oh, he'll never get those votes. And yet the polls show a sharp decline, especially among the young Black and Hispanic voters, in approval of Democrats and Joe Biden specifically. Now, we're only, 5 months away now from the general election. Those attitudes have sunk in, and they're not going to be turned around overnight, no matter what the Biden administration does, and calling Trump an enemy of democracy. They really hope he is convicted in this New York trial, because then Biden says, I'll be running against a convicted felon.
Let's talk about Donald Trump for a moment. Let's dig a little deeper into how Donald Trump's managing his campaign. As you pointed out earlier in the show, he's campaigning in the Bronx, where he ended up with, I think it's estimated, around 25,000 attendees. He was in New Jersey with 80 to 100,000 people turning up. Now, these are, let's be very clear, that they're not going to turn red on this election cycle. It's really unlikely to happen. I think New York State, the Ronald Reagan, I think, was the last to win New York State. But before that, Ronald Reagan, and then prior to that was Richard Nixon, who had been rejected by New York State twice, but then won again in 1972. But I think there's something very important to look at here, is that you have Donald Trump's campaigning in these areas where it's highly unlikely, almost impossible, that he's going to win. And then you have Joe Biden, he's done, at time of recording, he's done 5 visits to Philadelphia, 7 visits to Pennsylvania in all, just crossing the bridge there from Delaware. And he's not really getting out into the battleground states. Why is that?
Well, he's not drawing crowds either. I mean, he couldn't draw a crowd that would barely fit in a phone booth. There's no enthusiasm for him. If you look at these Trump crowds, they're incredibly enthusiastic,
Mm.
chanting and singing and having a good time. Where are the Biden crowds? There aren't any. He's not popular. There are a lot of people who just knee-jerk vote Democrat, and yes, sometimes that's true of Republicans as well. But here's the key about going into places like the Bronx and New Jersey and other places where he has difficulty or has had difficulty last time. He's sending a signal to the rest of the country, to blacks and Hispanics and other minorities and the rest of the country, that he cares about us. I remember Jack Kemp, the late congressman and HUD secretary, who used to call himself a bleeding heart conservative. He would go into places like Cabrini Green and East St. Louis, and he had credibility with especially black people because of his football career. He once said, it was really funny, a great line, "I've showered with more black people than are in the Republican Party." Now that was funny, and it had a lot of truth in it. But more and more, I think you're seeing in the polls and you're seeing in interviews words from especially black people who say, what has he done for us? Our schools are a mess. The crime is a mess. You can't walk down the street if you're a woman alone, and even a man sometimes, without looking over your shoulder. You're getting cold cocked on subways in New York. You're getting pushed off the subway tracks. I mean, it is just the crime is terrible. And you mentioned 1972. Well, let's go back 4 years earlier, 1968, where crime was a major problem. Riots at the Democratic Convention. There are a lot of parallels. I think there are going to be riots at this Democratic convention this year at the end of August. And that could count for a lot as people are watching their TV screens and seeing their nation falling apart.
As they say, history doesn't always repeat, but it does often rhyme. Cal Thomas, Thank you ever so much for being with us.
Always a pleasure, Mark.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.